OK, well, our police forces have been through unprecedented cuts in their budget and, of course, there's more to come. Some chief constables have warned there's bound to be an impact on policing in the region, with the Lincolnshire force in danger of folding entirely. In Leicestershire, there's been a radical reorganisation, and in a moment we'll be joined by their chief constable. But first, Rob Pittham looks at what it means for the bobby on the beat and the public who rely on them.
High-vis jackets and a high-vis presence are top of the agenda for PC Paul Laplat.
Morning, Claire.
Morning, Paul. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good.
Any problems today?
Nothing.
After a major reorganisation in his force, he's been reclassified as a dedicated neighbourhood officer, operating out of Oakham and covering a rural Rutland beat.
Visibility-wise, I look at spending at least 75% of my time out on the streets. Obviously, when you get to the station, there's certain things you've got to be doing. You're checking the crime, your emails. You've got a certain amount of telephone inquiries to do, but we can now keep that to a bare minimum, and we can get out on the streets more.
Instead of filling in forms in the station, he spends a few minutes checking his emails, and then he's out on the road.
Well, technology has been great. I mean, I've been in this job for 28 years, and now we've got computers in the cars, which is fantastic because we can access all the data from the cars. We don't have to be sat behind a computer terminal in the vehicle, so we can, our police vehicles now are like mini officers, and we've also got what we call like satellite stations out in our neighbourhoods which we can use as well.
All this, of course, is cheaper too, and that's the driving force behind the changes. The axe has been taken to police budgets across the region. The Leicestershire and Rutland force has had to cut £36 million from its budget since 2010, an 18% drop in funding. It's lost 181 frontline officers. In Lincolnshire, there's been a cut of £20 million, 16% of its budget, with 95 frontline officers going. In Derbyshire, £24 million has been cut, 13% of its budget, with a reduction of 274 officers. And Nottinghamshire has lost £47 million, 21% of its budget, cutting 350 frontline officer posts. And out in towns like Oakham, people are noticing the gaps.
We did see a few the community people, but not. I haven't seen the police for a long time.
I suppose as long as they do what's necessary, what they need to do we necessarily need to see them walking around in twos like we used to in the olden days?
I occasionally see them, but it isn't often enough for my liking, no. I do think it makes a difference, definitely.
It's very rare we see a policeman, but we don't have no trouble there, so to be honest with you, no, they've got no need. They've got to go into bigger towns.
But out on the beat, PC Laplat reckons his time meeting the public has gone up by 40%.
I love it. I absolutely love it. It's going back to days of old where the traditional bobby on the beat. But from my point of view, fantastic.
It's a dilemma facing every police force in the region, how to meet the public's demand for more police on the beat with an ever-decreasing budget and an ever-thinner blue line.
Well, we're joined now by Simon Cole, the Chief Constable for Leicestershire and Rutland. Welcome. Your officer in Rutland, as we saw in the film there, was painting a pretty positive picture of the changes that you've had to bring in. But the reality is that these changes you've had to make are caused by relentless cuts to your budget.
Well, we've had to change to respond to the fact that the police budget isn't a protected budget, and you've just shared some of the statistics there. What we're trying to do is meet what the public want, which is a visible presence and a presence that they trust, but balance that against the changing threats. So things like cybercrime, the changing threat of terrorism, a lot of those we respond to as a region, and we work collaboratively with the other forces all across the East Midlands. But what we've tried to do really hard is make sure we can respond quickly to incidents, and that people like Paul can get out and about, they can be known in a community, the community will share with them information. They will solve problems working with the community, all enabled by technology and some really good investment in technology supported by the Police and Crime Commissioner.
And this is a new focus for the force. As we saw, your officer there in Oakham spends a lot of time out on the beat, but presumably others have been redesignated and they don't go out on foot patrols ever.
Well, what we've done is try to give the beat teams the time to get out and about, our patrol and resolution teams the ability to get to things quickly where they're needed, and they're supported by a force investigation team and a team of colleagues who deal with the public with appointments that suit the time that the caller wants to see us, to try and be better at managing out the demand on us and working also with partners to manage that demand, because a lot of what we do overlaps with other agencies.
So those beat officers don't investigate crime then?
They'll investigate a crime if something's put straight to them, and they'll deal with it immediately, of course, but they haven't got a workload of investigations to follow up. That's being done by others within the force to free them up and get upstream and manage demand away so that we're not responding at a point of crisis.
Well, let's talk about how those budget problems are looking further on.
Yeah.
How is that going to affect your force?
Well, this change is about finding £10 million worth of savings. We know going ahead that we've got to find up to £35 million savings in total.
You've lost 181 frontline officers so far.
Yeah, we have, and some of that's about reprioritising what we do. Some of that's about using new powers that I have to designate things like investigators so they can be staff members rather than cops. But we are a business that spends 85p in every pound on people, and looking forwards, we will have to be policing with fewer people. OK,
well, Ed, you're hoping to be an MP in Leicestershire. Are you concerned by the level of these cuts that are still to come?
I think we all appreciate the challenges and the budget deficit challenge that all public services face, and we have to get that deficit down. Otherwise, we spend money paying interest on debt and tackling the deficit that could otherwise be spent on paying for services like Simon's.
But we were talking about the budget just a second ago, and this week, obviously, your party made it pretty plain that if your party wins the election, we'll face more big cuts in public spending, and of course that's going to have an impact on forces like Leicestershire and Rutland.
Because we still need to get that debt and deficit under control, because at the moment, until we do that, we're paying debt interest payments, and that is money, in a sense, down the drain. What we've seen in Leicestershire, and we're very lucky in Leicestershire and Rutland, we've got a first-class Chief Constable and Force, and we've got a very good Police and Crime Commissioner, Sir Clive Loader. Both of them working very closely together. We've seen crime since 2010 come down by over 20%, despite the tough times, and the reason being because Simon and his force have innovated. They've looked at new ways of working with IT, with portable IT,
yes, with all the new technology,
with body-worn cameras, and also the changes that Simon and his team have put in place have seen, I think I'm right in this, 40% increase in beat time for those neighbourhood officers.
Well, crime is
so actually we're seeing benefits. It's tough. It's not easy, but despite the tough times, we're seeing real progress.
Well, the news is, Margaret, isn't it, that crime is coming down, so police forces can do more for less?
Yes, but you can't keep on making massive cuts without having a real impact on the front line. And one of the things I remember our Chief Constable saying to the MPs in Derbyshire when the first round of cuts came in is it wasn't just the amount, it was the pace. He said to us, I actually probably could save this amount of money without damaging the front line, but I can't save it over the timescale the Treasury has given me without damaging the front line.
The front line? Would Labour do more to protect police, to ring fence?
Ring fencing is causing problems all over the place.
So it's not the way to go.
I think that's a difficulty. We have identified some savings that we think that the police can make.
270 officers.
I know, and also it's closing a lot of stations, which is not the end of the world, but a lot of people in those neighbourhoods are very unhappy about it.
Well, if you won't ring fence, would Labour do more to protect the police force?
We think that there are some savings that can be made through procurement and things of that kind, and we would want to see those savings made. But we don't agree with George Osborne about either the scale or the pace of the kind of cuts he wants to make. It's a repeat of the mistake he made in 2010, and it has brought things down somewhat, but not by any extent. What George Osborne promised.
Simon, I want you to be as honest as you can. You are a Chief Constable. Yeah. How difficult is it to deal with the level of these cuts?
Well, I think one of the challenges is, whilst you're quite right, recorded crimes come down. Of course, that's about 20% of what we do. About 80% of what we do is around safety and other issues, and that's what our call volume is from the public. It is a real challenge. We've taken the low-hanging fruit. We've worked really dynamically.
Any more of these cuts?
Well, we accept we have to take some measure of share of the cuts that the national debt, as Ed has alluded to. But it seems to me, quite disproportionately focused on the police service.
Will crime keep falling? Can it? If you have to take more cuts?
And I think what crime is worth some thought, because some of the cybercrime, some of the fraud, some of those kind of activities aren't really captured in the traditional data that we're looking at. So we need to be talking about threats and risks. We need to be talking about getting upstream of problems and dealing with people with other partner agencies to prevent them offending. Well, as I sit here now, you can't help but notice that the prisons are full, recorded crime is going down. but the full remit of what we do is a challenge against a growing population.
Well, you say that you work with other forces, and we saw in that report that Nottinghamshire had a 21% cut, and apparently they face the same again. In other words, their budget will have almost halved in 10 years. I mean, that's a worrying figure, Ed.
It does, of course, present a challenge for people like Simon. And I would say this, wouldn't I, but looking at Leicestershire, there is an issue where I'm not saying we should be exempt or we should have a special deal, but there is an issue with the way sometimes the funding formulas are applied. And take the Leicestershire and Rutland force. No one is saying that that force should have a special deal or be exempt from playing its share in tackling the deficit and making those savings. But I think the estimate is about 5.6 million is roughly what that force loses from the formula as it stands, just not being applied.
Let me tell
fully.
you what another Chief Constable's saying. Chief Constable for Nottinghamshire, Chris Eyre, he's been in touch with the programme, and he says it's hard for police chiefs like yourselves to plan properly because policies change every 5 years with an election, whereas they really need to be planning in the long term. Could politicians agree on longer term funding for the police?
Well,
would that help?
One of the reasons we would find it difficult to agree on longer term funding with the Conservatives is that George Osborne made it absolutely clear in December that the scale and pace of cuts he's proposing is not to do just with eradicating the debt and the deficit, because we all agree we have to do that. But you can argue about how and when. But he made it quite clear it's an ideological thing. He wants to cut the size of the state. He's backed off of that a little bit since December. In 3 months, he's had a change of heart. But if he's re-elected, who's to say he won't change his mind back?
Briefly, what would you say to the politicians?
I would say that, yes, it would be good to get our share of the funding formula as it is. You know, my concern is that policing is an unprotected budget going forwards, and that will have some real implications. And the job of people like me is to maximise every penny we've got.
OK, Simon Cole, thanks very much indeed for joining us in the studio.